What's going on, everybody? It's Johnny King with another episode of the Johnny King Show. I am stoked to have Boo Arnold in the house. Boo, nice to have you here.
Great to be here.
He's got quite the resume, but you wouldn't know it. He's from what my experience of you, you're very humble, very you're not going around showing off what all you've done, but it's pretty cool what you've been able to accomplish in your life. And you said just outside of San Antonio, Texas, correct?
Yeah, right. Yeah, just on the fringe in a small town, Bernie, Texas, just outside of
Bernie,
San.
Texas. Good old Texas. That's awesome. And you've got a beautiful wife and a bunch of kids.
I do. I've been married for 19 years, and I've got 4 kids, 2 daughters, 16 and 14, and then 2 boys, 10 and 8.
Oh man.
So we're running crazy around.
Keeping you busy.
Yeah, I think everybody's involved in a sport or two. I've got a daughter in theater.
Yeah.
And they go to an academically challenging school, so lots of homework. So literally, we're on the treadmill; it never stops.
Yeah. Well, Boo and I had a conversation before we started recording this one a week or two ago, and we just got connected through a mutual buddy of mine who said, like, dude, you got to connect with this guy. He's just one of the most genuine, personable people you'll ever meet, but he's successful in business. He's been successful in his family life. And I just really commend you. And I was inspired because you found a way to have what I feel like I talk to a lot of men about like the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment. You've achieved a lot, and maybe at times you sacrificed other things in your life, but it does seem like, I'm sure you can speak to that as we get going, but it seems like you've also found a happy place in life where you're around family and you're available to your kids, which I didn't have growing up, with my dad being a workaholic. So would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, on the success side, if I just jump into that compartment alone, I don't know that I feel all that successful. I think a lot of men feel that way. No matter what you've accomplished or achieved, and never, I didn't meet my goals. And I played college baseball. I wanted to get drafted. That didn't happen. In the entertainment industry, a buddy of mine's very successful. He's on a television show that ran for 12 years, and so that syndicated. And that was sort of my aim, and I never got there. So success in business is pretty tough, especially when there's comparison and goals and stuff. I guess I'm glad that I've been able to do some of the stuff I've done because of the experience. But I agree with what you said, that if you're looking for purpose and meaning, and you're trying to find it in work success alone, I don't think that's it. And what I found is the more responsibility I have in regard to helping and loving and serving others, especially my wife and kids would be primary.
Yeah.
That's where the reward is. And there's a lot of fulfillment there in giving and investing in the lives of my kids. And that would be true for other people outside of my family. But for me, I think probably the most rewarding thing I've done is to raise 4 children.
Yeah. I think it is one of those, I think it's just a big part of legacy, if you will. If a man who's listening to this is focused on legacy, children may or may not be in your picture if you're listening to this, but I do feel like supporting and mentoring future generations to be better off, to leave the planet better off than how we found it, I think is a pretty powerful thing. So, well, it's cool. And I think just, again, you're right. It's all relative. Comparison is the thief of joy. I think there'd be a lot of people who would look at, like, you played D1, like I played D3. I would have loved to. I couldn't choose which sport. I played too many sports. Played 5 sports in college, and I'm sure there's most people in, let's say, Hollywood, in Los Angeles, who would give anything to have your acting resume and career too, right? So it's funny how people look at it, right? But it does sound like you've learned. But at the end of the day, it's like, what would you trade for the family? Probably none of it, family.
No, that's my crown is my family. That's awesome. The achievement.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, I want to get into it a little bit more deeper, but why don't you tell the listeners or the viewers a little bit more about your journey, because you played baseball, you went to you also got your master's degree in divinity, so you did seminary, and then just kind of tell a little bit of your journey, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So what's funny is if you look at my bio or you read my resume, you think, gosh, this guy had it together. You know,
Yeah.
And then that's what resumes are supposed to do, I think,
Right.
or biographies, but that's not the case.
Yeah.
I've been vocationally confused most of my life.
Mm.
I've had some real crises and moments where I didn't know what to do. So, I've had to make some big decisions. So it's been a rough road in some ways for me.
Mm.
But I was a big sports guy growing up. Sports came very naturally to me. I played football, basketball, and baseball in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I played baseball in college. You say, yeah, you played D1 baseball. Well, I did letter my sophomore and junior year, but I got cut my senior year in a coaching change. So again, you look at just a couple of words and you go, wow, that looks great, but there's a story behind even in baseball. So my dream was always to play professional baseball. I was a very average D1 player, but I would have loved to have played single A ball for a year or two. Went to the Phillies camp by invitation from an older coach that I had who was then a scout. Didn't get picked up. So, but my last year in college, I was in a fraternity. I told you I got cut from baseball. That was pretty painful. I can remember walking away from the new coach's office. I had to walk about 5 blocks home, and as a 22-year-old, just tears streaming down my face because I loved sports so much, and I knew that was the end. So a real kind of moment of mourning, the loss of something that I love. But then, of course, when you lose something that you love, suddenly there's some disorder in your life, and you've got to figure out, okay, now what am I going to do? Right? I've lost that dream, and I've got to go in a new direction. I was in a fraternity, and I'd kind of moved away from that. Just the habits of that particular social group were less appealing to me, and so I got involved in a church, and I started working with a youth group, which really was good for me. And then it opened the door to my working with Young Life. I don't know if you're familiar with Young Life. It's an outreach to high school kids, a Christian outreach to high school kids. And I did that, moved to San Antonio, had a training program. I did that for 2 years, and then worked as an area director on staff with Young Life for 3 years. But during that period, I started taking seminary classes because I had a real, sort of crisis of faith. My worldview was confused. I didn't know, there are the 4 big questions in life. Where do you come from? Who are you? What's your identity? What's your purpose? And what's your destiny? Those 4 questions were really underdeveloped for me. And I didn't know how much confidence I had in the answers at that particular time that I had to each of those questions. So I needed more experience and education. So I went to Gordon-Conwell in Boston, and I got a master's degree in divinity. I didn't even know what a master's degree in divinity was when I was 20 years old.
Right.
And suddenly I'm in a seminary, but just to make that quick, you study church history, philosophy. The original language is Greek and Hebrew because you're learning to translate from original texts. And then did I say church history? Yeah, church history. Yeah. So it's actually a pretty general degree in that, though it's a master's degree. But I was able to study the last 2,000 years of church history, read the early Christian fathers, understand Luther and Aquinas, and really understand foundationally where my faith was. And I had some intellectual history on which to ground it. And that was really helpful for me. I also lived in a very diverse city with diverse point of views. I had friends who were atheist, Catholic, who were more liberal and secular. So those exchanges were really good for me. I love the diversity and the friends that I made there. After I finished that degree, I went to work with the foundation out of DC, and I spent 3 years back and forth working in Bosnia. And I don't know if you know anything about that war there, but it ended in the 90s. But it was there was division between ethnic groups, and then ethnic groups tied to various religions. So the Croatians were Catholics, the Serbians were Eastern Orthodox, and then you have Muslims in that region. And when Russia fell, that region, which was comprised of Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia, I don't know if I left one out, because they didn't have the pressure to hold together as a union because Soviet communism was no longer a threat. Each state started hustling for its independence. But with that breakup came a fight over resources. And then the propagandists in that region started telling each people group, the Serbs are going to come take your land, the coastline, or, you know, all the Muslims that were there, that, you know, you're going to be run out because you weren't originally here. This is the land of the Croatians and the Serbs. So anyway, great lesson on how people use religion and ethnicity to divide people,
right.
And then how leaders can use propaganda to create a situation that moves into war and ultimately genocide. I mean, there was some genocide in that war. It finally ended. We gathered young people there for 3 summers, and we talked about these issues. We would go visit a mosque, a Catholic church, an Eastern Orthodox church. We had Muslims with us. We had Croatians, Serbians, and then we'd bring Western Europeans and then some Americans. So a bunch of young people all together, you know, explaining who they are, where they're from, their worldview, and then really working to understand each other, because it's really hard to hate somebody that you know. You know, if I isolate in my own tribe, then I can very easily hate you if people are telling me who you are. If I go and I extend my hand to you and I spend a week or 2 weeks with you and I get to know you and who your parents are and, you know, brothers and sisters, what you enjoy, suddenly you're humanized, and it's harder for me to hate you. So anyway, these sort of issues we discussed. After that 3 years, I quit my work with the foundation. I bought a business from my brother, which I still have. It's a wholesale tour and travel business. And then I was again kind of at a transition. I'm like, man, I was in San Antonio at the time. I was 30 years old, single, so I didn't have the responsibility of a family, and I really felt like I was kind of standing still. I was making enough money to take care of myself, but I thought, man, I got to do something more than this. So I made a list of some things that I had always wanted to do that I'd never really had time to do, and one of those things was acting. And I think this was providential. So I called somebody about an acting class. I signed up for the class. I attended the class in San Antonio, and I met this wonderful woman who was a stage actress from Chicago. She wasn't teaching the class to make money necessarily, or I don't know, there could be a lot of ill motive, but she loved the art of acting, stage acting and film and television. And man, it was contagious. And I really bought into her, and her, you know, her contagious enthusiasm impacted me. And then I found a parallel between acting and sports. So in sports, you perform, right, with your body. You're manipulating your body to accomplish a goal, be it in baseball or whatever. Well, in acting, you're doing the same thing. You're communicating. It's a lot more delicate, and it also involves speaking and emoting, you know. But at the same time, you're performing, and then people are watching you perform, and they're, you know, telling you whether, you know, if it has an impact on the audience, that it's effective. And then you go in and you audition, and it's you know, it's like playing a sport. You perform, and then they say, you win, you lose. And I like that kind of challenge. So started acting, had quick success, booked some TV commercials. I booked an independent film in Austin. After about 1.5 years of this, contacted my buddy I was telling you about, who's really successful in television. He didn't usually answer his phone, but he did. I made the big decision, and again, talk about crossroads. I made the big decision to move to LA. And my friend told, and again, when I say providential, I think a lot of people think that God may be an impersonal power out there, or it's the universe in general. But I really believe God is personal, and that I can relate to him and he can relate to me. You know, in the Old Testament, the Jews saw God as beyond them and powerful, and in some ways threatening and other. And so they were real careful in the way that they related to God. But then when Jesus comes along, he challenges the religious establishment when he starts to refer to God as his Father. I mean, that's a very intimate and personal thing, right? So that's the way that I relate to God. I relate to God as a Father who loves me. Well, in this moment with this decision, something I prayed a lot about, whether or not I moved to LA. I knew that it was a left turn in life. I had some fear because I thought, here I am. Maybe I was 32. I said, this could be a fool's errand right here. I could move to LA and waste my time out there. And people were telling me, I didn't even know you had an interest in acting. You've just started doing this, and now you're going to bet your life on it by moving to Los Angeles. Are you crazy? And so I had that part of my audience speaking to me. Anyway, so I moved out to LA, and fortunately I had a referral to an agent who happened to dump me the day that I arrived. So that was not encouraging. Right. But every night I would pray. I'd go, all right, Lord, I'm here. If I'm not supposed to be here, make it clear to me tomorrow, because I don't want to be wasting my time and spinning my wheels. And that first summer, I booked a couple of TV commercials, which kept me in there. And then I did some modeling too on the side. It took me 3 years to get a theatrical agent. That's the hardest thing to secure in the city of Los Angeles. It's quite miraculous how it happened. I won't go into that, but through a strange turn of events and me making an effort, kind of this serendipitous thing occurred, and I booked the first television show. And I referred the casting director to an agent that I didn't have. He got the phone call and he took me. And so that kind of got me off and running. And I think I've got over, 45 or something credits on my resume, but I spent 15 years there. Yeah. After 15 years, then we moved back to Texas 5 years ago, just to raise our families here. And I have to say the timing was perfect, because I'm glad I don't live in LA with all the lockdowns that they have with 4 kids. Right?
Seriously. Yeah.
Anyway, I threw a lot at you, but that's kind of a quick summary.
No, and I was always wanting to almost interrupt you because there's so many little things in there, but I've got the picture, and I want to go back to ask about there's critical moments. And yes, I hear you say, like, you kind of feel like you've been maybe all over the board, and yet I kind of feel that way too in my life, in that I kind of like the variety. And so for better or for worse, I think those that are listening to this may resonate and say, yeah, I'm struggling to figure out the clarity in my life too at times. But what I love about your story is that whatever you decided, you just went for, and maybe you realize that's not where you want to go, so you just pivoted, right? And you've been pivoting, but you've still been a good, I'd say a lot of people would say you've been very successful in a lot of these different things, and has made you to be the man that you are today. So I wanted to rewind all the way back to the beginning of what you talked about, having kind of bet your life at that point on baseball, your dream being to make it in the pros and to get cut as a senior. You said you were a kind of a middle road, average D1 baseball player, right? What do you feel like that you could have, in retrospect, could have used, whether it be mentorship, were you just not athletic enough? What do you feel like was what kept you from taking it to the next level?
Honestly, talent.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, you've got to be realistic at some point. Like I said, I mean, maybe I could have played single A or double A ball, but I played against Robin Ventura. I played against some, MLB athletes, and I could see, I have a son that plays select baseball right now, so we're constantly measuring their skills. But I had probably a major league arm from the outfield. I wasn't fast. That hurts you. And I could get hot with my bat, but I was streaky. And so after so many years of baseball and measuring yourself against others, you do kind of find out where you are in the hierarchy. And I guess maybe my fault, I'm a realist, but I think that I kind of probably maximized my abilities and reached the highest level given the talent that I had at the time.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes you maximize the talent that you're able to tap into then. For me too, because I feel like, I was a pretty decent, naturally athletic, but I never had the type of mentorship or coaching that really was like, okay, over this summer, we're going to get really fast.
That's really changed quick now, but you're right. Yeah.
So could you have gotten faster? Yes. Could you have gotten less streaky with the bat? Probably. It's like you very well, because I mean, how many guys I mean, are really not, they don't rest on the laurels of being really, really athletic. They just work their asses off and they make it into the major leagues, right? Or whatever. It's like, I can see both sides, right? But then you also have those phenoms who are like coming out of the womb swinging a baseball bat, seems like. So,
I talk about this tension with a lot of people, and I'll give you 3 areas where people are trying to live a dream, and they're caught between, am I risking and believing that I can accomplish something, or am I a fool?
yeah.
And I'll give you the 3 areas. These people so entertainment is one. A lot of people in LA hanging in there. And how long do you hang in there?
Right.
If you're 62 and you've never booked a job, are at that point, are you a fool? Did you, or are you still hanging on to the dream and fight? I don't,
Right.
And again, these are subjective sorts of answers for people. I know guys, so I live on a golf course and I'm involved with our club, but the PGA Tour, a lot of young guys out there, they played college golf, D1 college golf. And then they just had an event at our club last year, and I went out and watched these guys play. And it was like God, I don't even know the tour. It was like a mini tour. Man, I'm seeing LSU bags, University of Georgia bags. You've got guys that are fantastic golfers all competing at a lower level. And so again, these young guys are saying, how long do I put my life on hold and chase this? And then I guess the other would be baseball, or kind of what we're talking about. But anyway, I mean, it's a tough game, right? How long should I push? How long should I fight? How long should I, look for the appropriate resources and people that can help me and really strive? And, and when do I finally recognize that this is, and this moves into a bigger issue, but the issue of vocation.
Yeah.
So, we have our occupations. That's the thing we do to make money. But vocation, I don't know if you know anything about it. So the Latin root for vocation is vox. So Bono renamed himself Bono Vox, good voice, right?
Yeah.
So vox is voice, or to call. And so the Catholic Church really looks at this in depth, but they believe that everyone has a vocation, or that there's a voice that's calling everybody to something specifically. So I think I don't think baseball was my vocation. It was something I love, but I didn't even consider the definition of vocation at 22. I was just chasing what I wanted to chase.
Sure.
But I think that, when people are really trying to discern what they're supposed to do, where they're going, and they're in these major crossroads and decisions in life, I think you have to consider the vocation, and that takes some real serious thought and help. What am I called to do?
Right.
And sometimes your vocation is separate from your occupation. Your occupation may be to, I don't know, to work at the car wash, and that's where you make your money. But your vocation may be to work with, handicapped kids at such and such, So I think God's placed within everybody talents, but then also spiritual gifts. And those spiritual gifts, when we exercise those, I really believe give our lives meaning. So that's a huge topic, but something to consider.
Well, and I think that's kind of what I was wanting to get into is like, to put all your chips in for baseball. And then as a senior, I can only imagine, what you said, that was probably the biggest, who knows, right? But one of the bigger disappointments you had experienced in the human experience thus far was getting cut as a senior. But I can also understand, I've seen that happen even, in the smaller schools that I've been to. At some point, like a new coach, especially, he wants to work a program and invest in kids. And if senior comes in, you're like, you're talented, but I only have 1 year, 1 season to work with you. It's like, I'm sorry, man, but I got to.
But then again, that leads to, again, a much bigger question. So not only are we making decisions, but our circumstances are making decisions for us as well.
True.
And then you have to ask yourself, is there some divine plan behind that's engineering your circumstances? And with wisdom, can you interpret what's going on? And again, that involves vocation, seeing what's happening in your particular circumstance. and doing your best to wisely make a decision
Right.
that really allows you to flourish and find where it is you're supposed to be in life.
Right. Right. So, I mean, in looking back on your life, I mean, do you feel like it seems like you would say you've been led, guided, right?
Yeah, and sometimes I felt completely lost. So I think in retrospect, you see that more.
Yeah.
Certainly, when you're in a moment and confused, you don't feel led.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some periods where I wondered if God was even there or existed.
Right.
Like, I feel lost. You're not speaking to me audibly here,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I've still got to make a decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think divine providence is seen in retrospect, and I do believe, though, there's an element of faith as we move through life and we make decisions.
Yep.
And by faith, I mean a belief that there is God, a personal God who's out there with a hand that's moving and working. And in faith, we're asking to know and understand what his plan is for our lives. Mm-hmm. That's faith. If I'm, and I've been in this position too, where I wasn't living by faith, I was just living for pleasure. That didn't work for me. I mean, I always tell my friends that are doing it, give it a shot. Let me know if it pays dividends, but it didn't for me.
Yeah.
I just hurt a lot of people and ended up miserable. Yeah. So I think that's a decision of faith, right? Mm-hmm. Am I going to live for pleasure? Is there something more? Right. Is it possible that God is personal? What are my circumstances saying to me? And how am I made? Mm-hmm. And I really need community to help me understand that, right? I need a friend who's watched me for decades, who's seen me in various environments, and in the way that I move and operate and the things that I do, help me understand how I'm made and what my gifts and talents are. Mm-hmm. Because, I don't believe that you can do anything you want to do if it's in your heart and you desire it. Yeah. I'm never going to play in the NBA, never wasn't going to happen. Yeah. So that's sort of a foolish notion, right? Right. We're all made in a particular way. The more accurate we are in assessing ourselves, the better prepared we are to take what we have to the market and do what we do in the market.
100%. And I'm curious if you're, again, looking back in retrospect, if you're getting cut from the baseball team helped you with rejection in LA, because I imagine you didn't.
Well, I think two different circumstances. All my eggs were in one basket with baseball. Yeah. And again, for me, my faith in God is primary, but within the religious, discipline that I operate out of, there's talk about ordered loves. So we have to order our loves in life. And if you disorder your loves, then you have a disordered heart and mind. So when I was playing baseball, my loves were disordered because baseball was it was at the top. And so that was a different circumstance. Not the case with acting. As I told you, I prayed a lot about acting. That was third or fourth on the list when I went out to LA. I knew that there would be other things for me to do out there. I wanted to build relationships, make friends. I ended up having 4 kids in LA. We helped start a church with a Presbyterian denomination. We were working with Afghan kids. We were housing children in the summer that needed medical care. Wow. We had a lot of purpose out there as a couple and family. So again, I was much better at ordering my loves in LA. And so the rejection with the acting, though, was tough. It didn't hurt because my entire life wasn't banking on that one thing.
Yeah, 100%. What would, I'm sure, what would you say was one of the bigger things that you learned from getting cut from baseball?
Well, that circumstance, I learned that I've got to prioritize my loves. That's in LA, getting rejected. I got pretty good at it. I mean, I'm pretty tough skinned, and it's been helpful with my kids because we all know that we lose a lot of times in life. If you're competing, you're going to lose, right? So I got pretty used to losing. I mean, I probably would book 1 in 20 auditions. So man, you're fighting the fight. And I just, I think that was helpful for me practically. I got pretty tough skinned with the rejection, with auditions and not getting jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you've got to, otherwise you're not going to make it in that business.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. Switching gears kind of more to your, seminary and divinity, your degree in divinity, you said you went back and you studied the more just Greek and Hebrew, the original text of the, Old and New Testament. The purpose of that being that there's less lost in the translation of what we use now in the current form of the Bibles, the various versions of the Bible, or what was the reason to just getting back to the actual?
Well, the reason I started reading a lot of existential philosophy, and particularly Albert Camus, and he sort of rocked my world because he was so brutally honest, but yet the conclusion that he drew was that there's no God. And really, the best thing that we can do in life is to sort of face this meaninglessness that we find ourselves in with acts of love, which I admired. I thought, I think he even coined the term, like, I'm getting this wrong, but sort of like this heroic virtue where I'm trying to love and serve others, but really there's no reason for it. But the fact that I'm doing it is pretty heroic, and I thought he was honest and I admired. But then I started having, questions about that. I'm like, wow, if you read Camus or Sartre or these guys, they were all post-Enlightenment philosophers who rejected traditional religion and came to the conclusion that, and this was on the heels of the scientific revolution. So we just live in a material world. That's really all that there is. There's nothing that's supernatural. There's no metaphysical. And we're sort of a biological accident that's evolved. We're sort of a flash in the pan, and then it's over and we die. Like, man, I kind of started wondering about that, and it was depressing to me. But I thought, I want to be honest and truthful enough. If that's the case, then tell me the truth and let's go that direction.
Yeah.
But so I was wrestling with those ideas, but then I needed some other options too. And my view of the scripture was pretty shallow, kind of Sunday school oriented.
Yep.
And so what I had been taught in church wasn't weighty enough to really counter these heavier ideas and these very thoughtful philosophers that I was reading. So as far as the Bible, that's a big issue. So I don't know, how much do you want to get into that?
Well, I mean, I definitely want to keep, I want to talk about Bosnia.
Reliability of religious texts is a huge issue.
Okay.
I'll just distill it down.
Yeah.
So the Bible, Genesis through Revelation, covers about 4,000 years. There's several types of literature, from narrative to poetry to wisdom sayings to the Gospels to letters that the Apostle Paul wrote to the growing church communities in the first century.
Yep.
So first of all, when you read the Bible, you've got to understand the context. And so a lot of fundamentalists don't do that. And that's why we're like, this guy's beat me up with these little trite sayings and he'll throw out a verse, but people don't understand the overarching narrative to a book that was that's comprised of thousands and thousands of years of information and has different categories of literature. So you really need to become a student of this body. It's a library of work, right? It is an event-based compilation of literature. The New Testament especially is a reported event, and the primary reported event in the New Testament is the bodily resurrection of Christ.
Right.
Now we have to ask ourselves, so what happened though, post-Enlightenment, this is what the academics of that time did. When they decided that the only thing that can be true is what I process through my five senses, they automatically negated anything supernatural. So surely those stories are not legitimate. They're trumped up. It's propaganda that instigated a movement, probably to kind of fight the Roman Empire or to overturn Jewish Orthodox. There's some ill motive.
Right.
But I don't believe that that's true. But that's kind of where you get this idea that the Bible is comprised of myth,
right,
and it's not anything that's anchored in reality. But if you read the Gospels, they're direct reports of an event, and the early documents start about 60 AD. That's a good 20 or 30 years after this reported resurrection event. And they started compiling the oral stories that they had. And then as they wrote these oral stories down, they compiled those stories. And so when I studied the Greek, we had a book basically which would show you the variances of all the documents from 60 AD up until 1800, the 1800. I mean, there's probably 5,000 documents. And so like if you and I were looking at all these documents, and let's say we scattered them all out on the floor of our living room and we put them in chronological order, and we started highlighting the differences as they'd been relayed through history, we would discover, and this one book that I have shows you this, there's only a 5% variance in these documents. And it's on minor facts, like how many shepherds there were at the birth of Christ. But when it comes to big events and, you know, the primary idea behind something that Jesus had to say or a miracle, they're all in agreement. So I found that they're reliable. But now how we take these stories and we translate these stories is, again, exegesis, and then you know, application. That's a whole nother thing to talk about. But anyway, did that help you at all?
It totally did. And it fascinates me because that's a big part of very similar to what you said. Like I just have a Sunday school education, and a lot of that growing up, I was checking out because mom and dad had me there because I was supposed to be there and I didn't want to be there. And but I do feel this tug on my heart personally.
I recommend a couple of guys for you. Do you know who Jordan Peterson is?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So you can go to YouTube, listen to so he'll take these Old Testament narratives, Adam and Eve, Noah. And again, people are like, who, you know, these are stupid stories. They're children's stories. Who would base their life or have faith? Listen to Jordan Peterson talk about the symbols in these stories, the relational dynamic, and the truths that they convey, and whether or not they're reflective of reality. And there's another guy named Jonathan Pageau, who's an artist. He's Canadian, and he's connected with Jordan. He talks a lot about symbolism, but listen to him too. I've learned a lot from those guys, and they've been really helpful.
Okay, that's really, really cool. And I think those that are listening are probably taking notes on that, because I think, I was listening to something yesterday about, excuse me, let me clear my throat, with Jordan Peterson. And it's just, he's so good. So I'm a
that guy's my hero, man. He's really stuck to his guns in the midst of a lot of pushback and fight, and I appreciate him.
He's done a great job for sure. He's so smart in many different ways. Well, I feel like we could talk about just this for an hour, but just kind of, there's so many things I want to talk about in your story, which I think is pretty cool. I want to touch on just your experience of being involved in the reconciliation of what was going on between Croatia and Bosnia. And I experienced there was Bosnians in St. Louis when I was growing up, and some of the nicest, hardest working people. But I almost couldn't, like, there's a war, and they came, like, I can't even put in context. And now, of course, as an adult, to experience that type of upheaval, you know, it's kind of, it's not like COVID, but, you know, something where it totally changes your landscape pretty quickly, and then you're moving to a completely different country, another part of the world. I just cannot imagine. But what was your experience of going over there and working with people? And
gosh, as Americans, we've been pretty fortunate, right? I read William Styron's a favorite author of mine. He's a fictional author. He wrote the book Sophie's Choice. You know, Sophie survived Auschwitz, but her big dilemma was, when she was in Auschwitz and she was standing there with her two children, the commandant of the camp made her choose one of the kids to live and one to die.
Oh, geez.
So of course that sent her over the edge mentally. But what was my point behind that? And so Styron, though, his primary character in the book is at Duke University in a fraternity. And he's like, so while Sophie's making a choice which of her children will die in Auschwitz, I'm drinking beer with the fraternity guys. You know, that was me, right? I was that guy. I think most Americans are that way because we've lived such a protected life. And we've grown up doing easy and fun stuff, kind of wasting our time. And the people in other places that really suffer. That's the case in Bosnia. I just summarized without forgiveness, there cannot be reconciliation. And that's what I learned. But it is very hard to forgive when people have murdered your relatives, you know?
Yeah.
And so the question is, where can we find forgiveness? And how is that? And again, the saying of Jesus is, if you don't know how much you've been forgiven, or if you haven't been forgiven, it's really hard for you to forgive somebody else. And so we really used Jesus Christ as a touchstone for this concept of forgiveness and reconciliation. So without forgiveness, there can't be reconciliation, there can't be peace or unity. And that's what I learned. But that's very easy to say. I don't know about you, if you've ever had anybody that's really hurt you or a family member.
Sure.
I can think of some really extreme cases. If somebody hurt one of my kids, to be honest, I'd probably want to kill them. I wouldn't want to forgive them or reconcile them. I would need some supernatural help to move in that direction. But that's kind of summarizes my time there.
Yeah, completely. It reminds me of what you said, at the beginning of this, which is like, it's, as the saying goes, it's really easy to kill from afar, really difficult to kill or hate up close, right? And that same type of thing, I think, relates to what we're talking about with God. It's kind of easy if you feel a sense of detachment from God long distance. It's kind of hard to, it's easy to feel like you've been forgotten or to be angry. It's a lot more difficult to be angry when you have that type of intimate relationship, whether we're talking God or in some type of,
Yeah, but there are all these barriers to those relationships,
Right.
Tim Keller's a favorite speaker of mine, but he says there are 3 reasons people don't believe in God. They don't believe in God because they have genuine and sincere intellectual concerns, which that's respectable. I totally get that. They've been hurt. They've suffered in life an injustice that they can't process. And why would a good God allow this sort of pain and suffering and injustice? Man, I really sympathize with that pain. And, I can't give anybody a quick answer on that. But that's one reason they reject the idea of God or even a good God. And then finally, and this is a little more obvious, and I guess I get this one, is pride. If I admit there's a God, then I'm responsible to a higher power, right? And he has expectations for me, and he has a design for me. And in pride, I want to do what the hell I want to do, right?
Yeah.
So there's some surrender involved if God actually exists. So 3 good reasons why we can move away from God. 2 of those I have a lot of empathy for and understanding. The third one I identify with and know that I can be an SOB just like the next guy until I'm ready to, I'm going to do what I want to, including God. I've had to I still am trying to overcome that, right?
Yeah, no doubt. But I would say, having gone through a divorce and various other challenges in my life, I do feel like those challenges is what really pushed me to, increase and lean on God, and has really helped my faith in the long run. Otherwise, it was just easy. Most of my upbringing in many regards. And that's why I was like, I didn't have a whole lot of need to rely on a higher power.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I love about AA. I mean, you're talking, you're saying a difficult circumstance humbled you and you found yourself in need, right? I love AA. What's the first thing you admit? I'm out of control and I need help. That's, as much as that seems like it's a terrible place, it may be your gateway to freedom, So isn't that great that God uses the worst stuff to really liberate us?
Yeah. I grew up with a saying, that trials are proofs of God's care.
Yes.
And that's always kind of resonated with me. I'm like, okay, God wouldn't give you anything that you couldn't handle. And a lot of it is like, it's me willingly going into the gym, because for this to grow, this bicep, it needs resistance, it needs demand, and I feel like we are no different physically, emotionally, spiritually. Right. So I think that's pretty powerful. Just talking quick second, because we could again talk so much about your acting career. What was one of the bigger lessons that you took just out of that type of endeavor, and having the cojones to go after dream when so many people were saying you're crazy, what are you doing? But you wrote down that you've appeared in really big shows like Grey's Anatomy and The Mentalist and CSI Miami, Nashville, a lot of shows that I think people would be like, oh, really? No, that's awesome. But then you also can say that you don't necessarily feel like, I don't know, people would say, look at your resume, like you said, and be like, dude, even to have appearances on that's pretty cool. But what did you learn through that whole experience of being in LA and being an actor?
So the first is you can never, you can't want to be an actor to be rich and famous. It won't carry you through the fight. And just like sports, acting was, I hate the word passion. It's so worn out, but it was really I just loved it. I would get as much joy out of an audition or putting up a scene in class as I would working on Grey's Anatomy, maybe even more. So the love of the discipline is what drew me to acting. And then there's a couple of things that I can get really excited about this, but you know what you get to do when you're an actor? You get to say whatever the hell you want to say and do whatever you want to do. And in society, we have constraints, right? And it's very good. I mean, I can't, go around saying what I'm honestly thinking all the time to my wife, my kids, to the clerk at the store. So these are all good things. It keeps our society in check and we're well mannered. But when you're acting, and I don't think that you're actually not, you're not mimicking something. You're releasing genuine, organic emotion. And very seldom do people get to do that. But when you're up on stage, and I loved it, Judith Weston was my acting coach, and she's kind of famous and well known. She's written books for most of the RTF programs in the world, really. But she would always say, when you're up on stage, you can let out whatever you want, and there are no boundaries or no rules.
Cool.
And I'm gonna tell you, that was a real release for me. To be up on stage and to see, I'm in a scene with a beautiful woman, and to feel love for her, or to be in a scene with a guy, and I mean, just wanting to, being able to release anger and to really, I can unload on him. I had all this reservoir of emotion and anger that I could release. Of course, it is safe because it's on stage, right? It's not, but you could really release it.
Yeah.
And so I love that about it. And then the other principle in acting is, and this is true about joke telling, stand-up comedy, telling a story to a personal friend, dancing. If you're not all in, it ain't gonna work. And so you'll notice that with people. They'll try to do something funny. I tell my kids this all the time, and they don't fully commit, and it doesn't work. So in acting, I learned to fully commit. Like if I'm gonna hate you, I'm gonna hate you, and I'm gonna let it go. And if I'm gonna love you with everything in my heart in this moment. So I just loved acting for that reason. In that little fishbowl, everything was legal. Everything within you could surface, and you could connect and relate to people. And the connection, what's interesting too with acting is if there's not a relational connection between the actors, it's not interesting to watch. So think about Good Will Hunting. That final scene where, gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Who are the two actors? Damon and Affleck. Remember, so Damon is like, Affleck's like, dude, you're stuck here and you're brilliant. And if I come back here and pick you up tomorrow morning, then I realize you're choosing to limit yourself and really to fail and to live this sort of obscure existence and never do what you're supposed to do, right? But anyway, they go through this, it's really dynamic, and you're standing by the car, remember? But the reason those guys are best friends in real life. And so it's the connection that's powerful. And you really see that Affleck really cared. Those emotions that he was funneling, I'm guessing, toward Damon, they were filtered through the words of the scene, and that scene's in a particular context of a story. But I guarantee you that emotion was organic and real. Totally. So that's what makes acting work, is the connection between. So it's a wonderful discipline. I loved it. I still miss it a lot, but family is kind of a priority for me right now.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think, but it resonates with I was telling you before we started recording at my most recent men's meeting. A big
Uh-huh.
part of that resonates in its own way, in the sense of like I do feel like, especially as men, if we've got anger and rage, it's really hard to get that out, because
Yeah.
if we were to actually show it,
Yeah.
probably women and children, other people would not feel safe, right?
Oh,
So where do we go to let that out? And
well,
then
typically we drink,
yeah,
we can let it out then, right? You
yeah,
had those friends that drink and suddenly like they're a monster and wanted to kick everybody's ass in the bar. I was like,
yeah,
what? But you're right. Where do we as men let that out? Yeah, great
yeah,
point. Yeah.
yeah.
What were you gonna say?
Well, I think that's just important that you found a healthy release for it, a great example of it. But that also, it's the kind of the connection between Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It's like that people see that, that connection on screen, but then also men crave that just in our day-to-day lives. They don't
Yeah.
get a whole of that. They might have it with their intimate partner, but other than that, we get so kind of isolated in our lives.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but women can't do for men what men can do for men.
Yeah, yeah,
And men can't do for men what women can do for men, you know.
right.
But your friends can. I always tell my friends, I can handle. There's things you can tell, you can't tell your wife, she can't handle it,
Yeah,
but I can handle it.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
whatever it is. It
yeah.
could be rage. It could be I'm looking at my secretary, and I can. So you're right, yeah. And I think men are a great place where we can deal with this, very powerful emotion that men have, and I think there are other outlets to exercise. But I think first identifying it, articulating what's going on,
Yeah.
actually releasing emotion. I've seen a lot of men cry over their relationships with their dads.
Mm-hmm.
They'd never dealt with
Same.
it.
Same.
What did Thoreau say? The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tough when we remain quiet and desperate.
Mm-hmm.
Bad things happen, right?
Absolutely. Well, we see it
Yeah.
almost every single day, especially like
Yeah.
up here in Boulder and
Shooting.
with the shootings. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really sad, and I think a lot of that does. My girlfriend was asking like, "Why does this happen?" It's like I don't know personally, but I do feel like this is for the mass of men a big issue, and it's
Yeah.
the boiling of the pressure pot that finally pops off, and it's in the form of significance and power, and even if it's like this is my last stand, it's really really
Yeah.
sad, but
Yeah.
it goes to why I do this podcast and why I want to have
Yeah.
conversations
You don't
like
see a
you.
lot of women killing people with guns.
Nope.
Women don't. The masculine personality has energy,
Mm-hmm.
and that energy is going to go somewhere, and it needs to go toward responsibility and love and care and service.
Right.
But if we feel like we're failing, or we're in trouble, and that energy builds into rage and anger, then it can go out sideways, and we can really get into trouble. And again, I have my own areas where when I had that hidden rage that I go for release. For me, it was typically in the area of sexuality,
Yeah.
but we all have those things that we turn to, we self-medicate or whatever.
Right. And then shame ourselves oftentimes as men for doing it after the fact, which I think is even worse, because it makes us feel like we are a bad person, and that's really tough. So I do feel like the more guys hear other men like you and all the work I'm doing, like, okay, we're not alone. There's got to be a healthy release, and new tools, if you will. Otherwise, we just keep doing the same thing to new generations, right?
And I commend you with what you're doing, because men who are isolated aren't necessarily going to volunteer. So that requires that some of us go out and pursue men, right? And engage and develop friendships. And you've got to be proactive about that.
Right.
And you're going to get rejected, and men are going to stiff arm you. But I have a best friend. He's been my best friend since I was 15.
Yeah.
The best thing he ever said to me when we were 20, because he was at Texas A&M and I was at Texas Tech, but we were together one summer. I'd never had anybody ask me this. I was 20 years old. He goes, "So man, how you doing?" And I go, "I'm doing pretty good." He goes, "Oh no, really? How are you doing?" I'd never had anybody really ask me. Yeah. And man, I just opened up. But I think that we have to pursue men and really, with a lot of sincere care and love, ask them, "How are you doing?" Because we all struggle. I mean, it's a fact, right?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I think a lot of men who are isolated and don't necessarily have the support they need, they suffer a ton. And I think a big part of, what I can see in terms of business, I feel like partnership, and I kind of want to talk about, last thing I want to talk about your relationship with your spouse and that sort of thing with your kids. But I do feel like whether you're looking at Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, like all these successful, they always had a number two guy that was kind of in the shadows, but just as supportive, and not to, so I feel like that dynamic of having a partner in life, it's so powerful to be able to support each other in our individual life goals. And of course you can come together and have children if that's something that someone wants to do. But what has, I mean, you mentioned at the very beginning of this, and it's funny, we're just now getting to it, but your family, your wife, your kids, your two boys, your two girls, like that's kind of like the apple of your eye. What's been the more cherishing part of having a family, raising a family, doing it with Stacy and that sort of thing?
Man, well, I mean, it really is my entire life. And I just, I could never, unless you've parented, it's hard to understand, but investing in somebody's life from birth to adulthood is remarkable. There's nothing more rewarding, there hasn't been for me, than that. I've got a 16-year-old that's about to start driving, and to see who she's become, sort of person she is. Each kid's different. God's made each of them a different person with a different, but it's just been an amazing project that my wife and I have been able to work on together, and we're in it together. We're partnered and we're on the same page. And, ultimately, I guess it's rewarding because it involves love, and
Right.
and love means that we're laying our lives. I always, I tell my kids, I go, they never show disrespect for the mother, because they'll pay the price. But she literally has given everything she has, including her body, so that they could live. She birthed them. She breastfed them until her breasts weren't there anymore. She's given everything, and I think that principle in life plays true across the board. Jesus said this, no greater love is there in life that a friend would lay down his life for. That's true for anybody. You lay down your life for your friend, your spouse, your children. You're really experiencing what love's all about. It's, I'm diminishing myself so that you can live. That dynamic is primary in life. And again, in my opinion, that's what God's done for me. So I'm trying to, with his help, mimic his sort of love to my family. But it's been great. I love my family. Yeah.
100%. What would you say were some of those things that you looked for, or maybe stumbled into, that allowed you to choose a great partner in your life?
Well, making the wrong choice multiple times. Because I had a bunch of, I had an alcoholic mother who pretty much drank herself to death, sadly enough. So my relationship with her was strained. So that opposite sex dynamic really informs how it is you'll relate to the opposite sex as you move into adulthood, right?
Totally.
By the way, totally reconciled with my mother, love her, no ill feelings, really reconciled with her before she died when I think I was 30. But so I took that opposite sex relationship dynamic into my relationship with women, and I was terrible. I was like, take it or leave it, controlling. I don't like the way I was domineering, and it was horrible. And then pretty selfish too. It was mostly about me, ego driven. I remember in college realizing that I had a girlfriend in college. I'm not exaggerating. She was probably the most beautiful girl on campus. And I remember thinking, she was almost like an extension of me. Her beauty said more about me than really my concern for her or what I thought about her. Now, that's real simple. I mean, I'm sure I cared about her at some level. But so I had some horrible, and it took me probably 5 to 7 years to really work through what was going on in me internally. So by the time that I met my wife, I was healthy. But I had to get healthy And I was pretty unhealthy. And we all do that, right? We all start out in deficits in some area, given our nuclear family.
Yep. How were you doing the work though? How did you do it during those 5 to 7 years?
I went to a lot of counseling. At one point, and I kind of went through the 7th step of AA, where I went back and I don't know what step it is. I apologized and reconciled.
Yeah.
I actually went back to these girls and I had dinner with them, and 3 of them were pretty grateful. I think one of them may have thought I was crazy, but I just said, I'm sorry. I didn't treat you. And so anyway, that was part of the process, was, trying to reconcile and just, tell people I apologize. And then understanding, Al-Anon and alcoholics and codependency. I mean, I had a lot of hangups. And really all that, that's all a bunch of psychological mumbo or jumbo. But really what I had was a great defense system. If I walk around, if you and I live together and I got up and punched you in the face every day, man, you're going to learn to distance yourself. You might learn how to punch back or counter, bob and weave. You might learn how to throw a baseball at me, right? I had all those things, man. I had a defense system in place that really left me alone. And, those self-protection strategies hurt. So it took a long time for me to unwind those. And part of that involves sort of what we were talking about, the release of anger and bitterness and animosity. And it was not an overnight process. It took a while.
Well, it's really good to hear, because I think a lot of guys feel broken, and the more I kind of explain my own repressed anger and how that's showing up in my life, and the numbness or the anger, but what's the anger really covering up? The anger is covering up sadness, loneliness, disappointment. Guys are like, yes, me too. Oh my gosh, like I'm not the only one. That's amazing. But I do feel like then the next question is like, okay, so what do I do with it? And you're saying it's a long process. You have to go to counseling, coaching, get whatever it is, just get a lot of help, start talking about it. I feel like that's a big part of releasing, is talking about it. Right. But it's, again, cool to see a guy in your position at this point in your life where you've had, that's kind of a crappy childhood, to have a mom who's,
Well, I'll tell you the toughest part about it. And I've got a friend who I feel like is really good with this issue.
Yeah.
And that's the issue of shame. So, man, shame is powerful, right? And we develop a lot of responses to personal shame.
Yep.
But, if you have an alcoholic in your family, that's somebody that's acting out and doing embarrassing things, you have shame. Or if you yourself have done something that you're horribly embarrassed about, something that, others know. So shame can just squash you. And shame is, I don't want you to see who I really am, right? So it isolates you. So part of opening up is exposing your shame, but how do we find the courage to expose our shame, and who do we expose it to?
Yeah.
We can only expose our shame to the person we know that loves us anyway, right? That, I had an older guy that mentored me, and long process of getting to know each other. But he asked me one day, he said, look, I've told you who I am. How well do you want me to know who you are? And I wouldn't tell him the truth about myself, which really involves some shameful stuff and some shameful places that I had been, because I didn't want him to see my shame, because what was my fear? He would reject me, right? Like, you'll know how terrible I am. When I was able to expose my shame to him and talk about the events and places and things that I had done, and I got no reaction out of him, I actually felt like he loved me more. A light bulb went off in my head, and that is that if I expose my shame and I'm that vulnerable with the right person, it actually draws them to me. You don't guess that, do you? That's not instinctive. But exposing your shame to a good buddy will only draw him to you, because you know what? He recognizes the humanity in you because he knows he's human, right? So that's huge.
It's like vulnerability begets vulnerability. And you think someone's going to stomp on you. But in reality, I think, especially in an intimate relationship, the more vulnerable, more authentic, transparent you are with your skeletons in your closet, the more actually people are like, oh my gosh, like, thank you. And then here's, there's that rule of reciprocity.
Which is another reason why people, I think, are leery of any sort of ideas or thoughts about God, because their perception is God wants me to be moral, and if I'm not moral, he's going to get me. He wants me to perform morally. And so that's the wrong. I don't like that God either. That's the wrong. The God that I know is full of mercy and grace, right? And understands my experience on this earth because he was incarnate in a person of Christ. Christ understands my struggles. So again, I think, we tend to move away from faith if we think that God's judgmental, like we might think a friend is judgmental. Who wants a judgmental friend? Again, I love AA. AA's the great. I have a buddy that's an alcoholic. I know it's terrible to say. He and I went to see U2 in Dublin.
Yeah.
He goes, all right, man, I got his GA tickets. We got on a plane. He goes, but while we're there, you got to go to my meetings with me. And I go, great. So I went to, I think, 3 AA meetings while we were in Dublin. Loved them. I mean, these people are just who they are. There's no shame. You talk about where you've been and you're received with open arms, and people want the best for you. They're rooting for you. And it's just beautiful. And I think that embodies the Spirit of God and his mercy and grace, and which is why, AA is rooted in, belief in a higher power, right? So anyway, shame's a powerful tool. A powerful barrier.
Yeah. But also could be a tool to, like you said, to really take the layers off and to take the mask off.
Let me ask you this. One more point I'll make about, assuming there's a spiritual world out there. So the lie would be that shame, your shame will repel everyone and will lead to judgment and condemnation, and they'll think you're terrible, right? So where do we get that lie from? That's just a question to leave out there. But if the truth is, and you only know this through experience, that if I am vulnerable with the right person and I show them my shame, it draws them to me, then there really is a spiritual battle, and it's a battle of truth and lies, right?
Completely.
So we're living in one of those two worlds. And that's why I think we need good, mature friends who help us discern truth from lie.
Couldn't agree with you more. And which is why I think that the call upon men, especially these days, and women are calling out for men to step up as that man 2.0 version or 3.0 version. It's like, let's evolve here, guys. You're either going to get left in the dust, or you're going to have to evolve into a more healed, integrated man, and it takes a lot of effing work, but it's worth it. It's totally worth it. So it's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for
having
out.
Me.
It's
great talking to you.
There's so many good things to talk about that, like I said, we could go on for another couple of hours, honestly. So maybe this would be part one of many parts in the future. So, but anyways, thank you for who you are. Thanks for the example of, father and businessman and God-fearing man that you are. I think it's been an impressionable one on the listeners, the viewers. And if anyone wanted to maybe they just called upon to connect with you, how could someone maybe just reach out or get in touch, social media or anything like that?
I've got a public Facebook page, so they could reach me there.
Okay. Which would be what? Just
I think it's just, if you Google my name, you'll see it. Boo Arnold. Booarnold. Yeah.
There you go. Very cool, you guys. Well, thank you again for joining us. I really do hope that you got at least one good nugget. I'm sure you got maybe 10 out of this good conversation, but if you want to reach out to Boo, feel free. And until we chat again, thanks for joining me on the Johnny King Show.
All right. Hey, give some love to my friend Dirk, man.
I will.
All
All right. Take care.
Go ahead, Johnny. All right.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.